This is TWiT.
Earlier this month, security researcher Vinny Troia discovered nearly 2 terabytes of unsecured data from marketing firm Exactis. The data appeared to include personal information on hundreds of millions of American adults and millions of businesses, including phone numbers, home addresses, email addresses, and even personal characteristics. Joining us to talk about how he made this discovery is Vinny Troia, CEO and Principal Security Consultant of Nightline Security. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So walk us through how you came upon this, this leak of information.
Sure. So I'm pretty familiar with a specific type of database called Elasticsearch. And I guess it occurred to me that there were quite a number of open Elasticsearch installations here in the US. So I pulled a list of something like maybe, 7,000 companies that had their data exposed. So I literally just started going down the list and scraping a bunch of them and just seeing what kind of information they had. And I came across the Exactis servers. And then once I started poking around, I noticed, well, hey, there's kind of a pretty good amount of information here. And so once I started looking at what the data actually was, I mean, it occurred to me that it was, it was a US database. It seemed like a marketing database, but I mean, it had pretty much everybody in there.
So how many work hours is that? Like, does that take you an hour, 12 hours, 3 weeks? How long are you, how long is that?
That's a pretty good question. The short answer is I don't know. Because, it's just one of those things where, one night I wrote the script, another night I kind of set it off, and I think it was running for a couple days before I actually looked at it again. And then, going through the data takes a few days just to see kind of all the stuff that's out there. So, I mean, it probably took me a solid few weeks of work to find it. But, once I identified kind of what it was, it came together quickly at that point. But I mean, I guess getting to that point, probably I'd say a solid few weeks.
So I know you have like over 20 years of experience in IT security and software development. And how long have you been doing this sort of work that you're doing now? Like just the white hat hacker work. How long have you been doing that?
I'd say probably for most of my time at this point, because I got started doing like software development and web coding, and a lot of the hacking work that I did at that point was just trying to break the software that we had written. So there's always kind of like this element of hacking our own stuff. So I'd say I've pretty much been doing this all my life. And when I got started years ago, I think maybe 11 or 12 when I got my first computer. We didn't really have much to do, right? So, hacking into, phone lines and, seeing kind of what systems were on the other end was, I guess, kind of second nature to us. So I guess I've pretty much been doing this my whole life.
And so are things getting better or harder? Are you noticing things are getting harder to crack or easier? Some things are getting harder. Some things are pretty much staying the same. There's plenty of instances where, like in this case with Exactis, I mean, there wasn't anything to crack. I mean, it was just sitting there, right? So, if there had been a username or even a password in front of the thing, I never would have found it. So, in some respects, there are some things that are pretty walled up. I mean, the technology's really improved a lot. It's just, do people actually use it, or do people take the time to, do what needs to be done to secure their systems, which I think is kind of the problem we're running into now. So what you're saying is there's so much data out there. Really, your job at this point is to figure out how to find it.
Yeah, I mean, I had some free time and, I decided to write a couple scripts and, and I found it. I mean, I wouldn't say this is my job day to day, but, now, I mean, a lot of what I do kind of with Nightline Security is, I mean, I work with customers and we try to find creative ways to break into their systems. I mean, that's I guess, kind of what I'm known for, and that's what they pay me for. So, more often than not, they don't have this level of, most people don't have this level of data, period. But I mean, the ones that do, I mean, they don't just have it sitting there, right? But, it's very, I guess, few and far between that I'll actually get a chance to work on something kind of cool and just different like this.
So yeah, we should talk a little bit more about the leak itself. I'm just fascinated by by white hat hacking. But the information had not, I mean, everything that I just described before, but also like gender of children, adults, children, and other like really like this is marketing stuff, like stuff that usually you wouldn't want any of this known. But I mean, what did you do with it once you found it? And like, what's the next step after you found it? That's a pretty good question. So once I found it, I started going through it, right, to figure out. I mean, because there was so much data that it seemed the size was just unusual, right? I mean, to see 2 terabytes of data, right? I mean, finding a way to scrape all that just isn't necessarily easy. So then once I started looking through it, I mean, like you said, I mean, there was a lot of. So when I just went back and did a tally the other day, it turns out there were about 300 fields per user. And so we're talking about things like, do you have a Visa card? Do you have an Amex? Do you have a Discover? Do you have a retail card, a gas card? Do you have kids? Do you have pets, cats, dogs? Are you, a woman worker? Are you a male, worker? Or do you, are you into outdoor activities? Do you smoke? Do you contribute to political campaigns? I mean, just anything you can think of. I mean, it was just so in depth. And so starting to look through all that, I mean, it's a little dizzying at first, honestly. But, once you kind of get a handle on everything that they're looking for, I mean, it's certainly interesting data. And then I started just putting in my info, and I started looking up some of my friends to see if they were in there. And I mean, everybody I looked up was in there. And then I started looking up celebrities, of course, and they were all in there. And so I figured, now we've got considering I've got 100% hit rate, I'd say I'm fairly confident that, this is pretty much all the U.S. citizens, or at least pretty much every household. And then, I contacted my buddy Andy at Wired and just kind of told him about it. And that's kind of how we ended up here.
So was the information about you accurate in your friends?
Yeah.
It was. Oh.
It was. Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of fields that were like unknown fields, like do I contribute to political campaigns, or, any of the, am I an outdoor person? I mean, there were a lot of views for unknown. But the stuff like my name, my address, my phone number, my date of birth, there was also a field for age at the time of the directory building or whatever, which gave me a pretty good sense that it was put together last year. So the data is not terribly old. But I mean, all of that stuff was spot on. I mean, my phone number was accurate. So yeah, I mean, it was pretty accurate.
So your buddy Andy, of course, is Andy Greenberg at Wired. So before he published the story, did they lock up the information?
Yeah, so I did forget to mention that. So I was able to get in touch with Exactis. I told them kind of what was going on. And within minutes of me kind of telling them that I had found this data, I mean, they pretty much shut it down. So, I can't say whether or not they knew it was open, or if it was an oversight. I mean, I really have no idea. But once I told them how I found it, I mean, they shut it down pretty quickly.
So I am surprised at how little I heard about this. I mean, this is likely every U.S. citizen is in there. Are we just in hack fatigue? Like, are we just like, well, it's all out there, who cares at this point?
Honestly, I think so. I mean, I think the media is so over inundated with just breaches every other day. I mean, it's almost like, well, if you hear about a breach of 150 million records, well, that's not big enough to make the news anymore. Now it's got to be, every U.S. citizen, or there's got to be, 2 billion records from whoever. You know what I mean? So I think people are just kind of numb to all this data breach. So I'm just not sure that, I don't want to say that nobody cares, because it is a serious issue. But I think most people in their households maybe just assume at this point that their information is out there and there's just nothing they can do about it.
But I mean, we talked earlier about the story in the Wall Street Journal about, the tech's open secret that app developers are reading your email. But, these are vetted app developers. But anyone, if came upon that information that you found, could create a really elaborate social engineering scam and basically get anything they want from anyone.
Well, and that's just it. Yeah, I mean, just because your social security number is not in this doesn't necessarily mean that it's not invaluable or not valuable information, right? If I was going to send out a phishing campaign to targeted people, well, now I know what their interests are, what kind of things they like to do, and I'd probably create some phishing emails that are a little more tailored towards them to increase my click ratios. It would take a little bit more work, but it would be worth it if the success rate goes up, which it would. Then you can start looking at, okay, well, if we know their interests, we can probably figure out what some of the main sites they go on, and now we can go on other websites to find their passwords. I mean, we can, take their email address, and we can, go to any number of websites to find passwords. And then maybe we could start logging into them. And then from there, it just kind of cascades. So there's quite a bit of damage that can be done from these type of lists for sure.